It has been 74 years since the Great War with Queen Mazenberger has ended. A time of peace and tranquility has fallen upon us. Or has it? Find out today as I play 600 years of kingdoms and castles. If you haven't seen the previous videos, check them out before this one. Link down below. Large Vortia continues to prosper as its citizens diligently build up its economy, infrastructure, and agriculture. Despite the long-term trauma from the war, everything else was going well. The citizens even expressed how happy they were under my rule. It was almost as similar as the happiness levels in Vortia itself. Speaking of Vortia, since the war ended, it was now time to improve the standard of living and the convenience of living in it. I could tell that the citizens were getting a little bit salty as Large Vortia was getting all this new construction, while Vortia was getting none of it. Well, that's now all about to change. Since the new city is more stable now, I can focus in on improving both. These improvements are starting off with a new farm. The food rations have been getting a lot lower in Vortia as the population had been steadily growing. Also, now knowing that you could use moats to power Norias, I ended up placing some down. This way I could remove the aqueducts that were taking up too much space. I also had come up with another large and ambitious plan. I wanted to surround my whole island with docks, so that way I could extend my walls even further. Well, look who's back, acting like nothing even happened. King Banta had returned, and he wanted to discuss trade prices. I wasn't really planning on building a really good relationship with him again after what he did. So, I just kind of went along with it and made him happy, but I don't know how long this friendship could last. While the negotiation was going on, a huge Viking armada had made its way over to Vortia. The Vikings were coming down on us with full force. It looked like there were over 10 different ships. Now that's what I call a lot of Vikings. The invasions that were going on for the last 200 to 300 years weren't that impressive. They weren't making any progress in destroying my castle, and they honestly weren't getting any loot from it either, so they were just wasting troops. It appeared though that even sending more Vikings and even stronger units wasn't going to be enough to deal any real damage to my kingdom. After dealing with the Viking invasion, I started to clear out some trees and put down some more foresters as my wood stockpiles were very low. I continued placing more farms on Vortia, and then I reworked the whole wheat field farms on Large Vortia. I figured if I'm reworking the agricultural area, I might as well build some more moats and a new Noria. That way the soil will be a lot more fertile. Obviously I had to make sure that the water was accessible by all the farms, so I threw down a reservoir right behind the Noria. It provided water for all of the farms in the nearby area. This was pretty clutch. Back on the main island, I ended up moving one of the Norias once again. I saw some potential in saving even more space by removing the aqueducts that led to it. Dragons! As we were accustomed to, 2 large dragons started attacking our islands. The giant red fire-breathing one had made its way over to Large Vortia. Thankfully I had a lot of ballistas set up in place as they took them out instantly. On the other island, the black and orange dragon had attacked one of our ballista towers. It set it on fire and actually ended up destroying it. Strangely enough, once the tower was destroyed, the dragon had made its way over to King Banta's island, where it was later killed. My people weren't going to let the destruction of one of the ballistas faze them, so we started construction on some apple farms in Large Vortia. It only made sense to put them near the water reserve that was currently feeding all of the wheat farms. To make things easier for the farmers, I placed down a granary and produce storage. This eliminated the need of having to haul the food all the way across the island just to store it. King Banta was sending over another diplomat. It looked like they were carrying a gift, and I was the only other kingdom to exist, so obviously it had to be for me, right? I guess we'll never know. I started to get distracted by castle upgrades, and I honestly ended up forgetting that he even sent over a diplomat. On top of all these upgrades, a Viking invasion broke out. That definitely contributed to me forgetting that there was a diplomat sitting at my doorstep, but hey, I'm supposed to be mad at King Banta after what happened. Well, 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 that looks like a promising Viking invasion. For once, the enemy forces looked pretty significant. A whole armada of Viking ships landed their troops on my docks. I actually got to see some enemies make it near my castle walls for once. That doesn't happen often. Unfortunate for the Vikings, they still didn't send enough troops to deal any real damage. Once the invasion started to clear up, I just continued building like nothing even happened. Now that's a little bit embarrassing. Some of my royal citizens had then suggested that I rename Large Vortia. I ended up renaming it to Greater Vortia. This sounded a lot more official and even cooler. Now obviously I won't let any good favors go unrecognized. So I decided that I would build a theater in honor of the citizens who recommended the name change. As the construction of the theater began, I also started construction on a large reservoir back in Vortia. This way I would be able to provide some more water to my city. I honestly wasn't going to need two Norias right next to each other, so I knew that in the future I could destroy one of them. Vortia was becoming so big that I had to destroy some of the forest on it. This wasn't ideal, but at the same time, the only way to keep expanding and growing was to clear out these forests. I could use them for houses and more food areas. In the meantime, I noticed that Greater Vortia was only producing wheat, apples, and very little fish. There was no pork. So I started construction on 2 different swine herds. On top of that, I also started to fortify some of the walls. One single layer of walling was not going to be enough to protect me from the Vikings on Greater Vortia. So I had to make sure that there was more than just one layer, and we actually had good defenses here. Unfortunately, it seemed like there were quite a few areas on my island that weren't walled off at all. Vikings could just land there and start raiding with no resistance. So it was really time to start filling those gaps and continue fortifying the walls. Wow, who would have thought that things could be so peaceful? We had been at war for more years than we hadn't been. Now that's really crazy to think about, and it was now time to enjoy our peace. Oh, of course, right when I had to say that, 3 fierce-looking dragons had made their way onto the island area. Thankfully, the giant red one that we normally see had been taken out right away over Vortia. A black and orange one, as well as a small little orange one, had made their way over Greater Vortia. We had taken out the small orange one almost instantly, as it seemed like it was the weaker one. The black and orange one, however, made its way to one of my ballista towers and took it out. Thank God they're not that expensive to rebuild. Sure enough, after destroying one of my ballistas, the black and orange dragon had made its way over to King Banta's lands. Unfortunately, I wasn't going to get the kill and get all of its meat. But it's whatever, I guess King Banta needs it more than I do. Speak of the devil. King Banta had sent over a diplomat, and when I finally talked to them, he was pretty mad at me. He had informed me that his diplomat had been waiting there for quite a long time, and he was super mad about it. Honestly though, he wasn't in the position to even get mad at me. He had literally turned against me in the middle of a war that he promised to fight with me. Now that's just low. After fighting off all of those dragons, I had placed down a forester in the middle of the inner walls of Greater Vortia. It seemed like I had a very good opportunity to get some extra wood, so I might as well capitalize on it. Once the forest area was cleared out back on Vortia, I placed down some moats, planned on building a Noria on them, and then placed a large reservoir. Sure enough, right when construction started, I started hearing smashing against my walls. I went to go look, and another Viking invasion had broken out. It felt like these were coming way more often than they used to. It had also looked like they were only going to King Banta's island. This was pretty hilarious, not gonna lie. I only had to worry about 2 Viking units, while King Banta was fighting off the whole Viking army. He did have a lot of troops, but it looked like they had to retreat back to the castle. That was when the rest of the Vikings started pillaging his houses, and actually started doing some destruction to them. I was surprised that King Banta's defenses weren't good enough to even prevent the Vikings from dealing a lot of damage. The giant ogres even almost walked from one side of the island all the way over to the castle. Now that's just embarrassing. As the Viking raid started to clear, I expanded my dock by quite a bit more. It looked like I was burning through a whole bunch of wood, but I might as well go all out for this. It was my next big project after all. What started to seem like a common occurrence, King Banta had sent over some more diplomats. Once again they were holding a gift, but he didn't deliver that gift to us. He also claimed that I was supposed to help him out in this last invasion, and I didn't. I don't even remember agreeing to that, and why would I? I then started to seriously question my building decisions. Why would I build only one small reservoir when I could build one large reservoir right next to the Noria? That way more water is pumped through the lands. Honestly, what's even the point of the small reservoirs? I had then also noticed that a lot of the fishing docks surrounded by regular docks were no longer functioning. It seemed like they needed to be at the very end. I didn't understand that because it's a dock and you should be able to fish wherever, but who knows. All of this dock building was running my wood supplies dry. So I threw down another forester in what remained of the little forest area on my island. Since Greater Vortia wasn't completely closed off yet, I decided that I should throw down some more archer towers and ballistas. That way all of the Vikings could be handled if they try landing in the gaps. Once I saved up a little bit more wood, I placed down another forester on Vortia as we really needed it desperately. Wow, the dock is really coming together. Nothing beats the end of the decade dragon invasion. This time, there were only 2 dragons that invaded though. This was a little bit weird because I saw 3 of them last time, and it seemed like these dragons were even weaker. I thought they were supposed to get harder as time goes on. Look who it is, again. I wonder if this time I'm actually going to get a gift. I doubt it though. I wonder if he's just doing that as a psychological tactic to make me want to be friends with him just to receive my gifts. Well, there's only one way to find out. And of course, not a gift. King Banta had asked me to help him out with the next Viking invasion. I told him no, as I didn't feel like helping, and he honestly didn't deserve it. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that. After seeing that the happiness level in Greater Vortia surpassed the one in Vortia, I knew that it was time to expand. Having too large of a population can decrease the happiness in a town. So, that's why I was taking it super slow with Greater Vortia, as we had just recovered from a giant war and the people were still suffering from its trauma. Well, apparently not anymore. I continued building the new neighborhood, expanded my defenses, and then saw King Banta take on a whole Viking invasion by himself. I don't know what it was, but the Vikings weren't even thinking about coming to my islands. I wonder why. It had been 2 or 3 years since I requested the foresters be built on Vortia. Unfortunately, they weren't yet. The Noria also hadn't been constructed. This large dock project was definitely taking away from my town a little bit, but it seemed like the people were still very happy, at 100% happiness. While looking through the different buildings, I had realized that I didn't have a keep in Greater Vortia. So I placed down an outpost, the closest thing that I could build, next to a keep. I further wanted to improve the diet of all citizens on Greater Vortia. They had been through a lot with the war, so I wanted to make sure that they had all of the food varieties that they possibly could. King Banta had then sent over a diplomat to complain more. He told me that he was going to close trade with our kingdom because we weren't friends anymore. Honestly, that was fine with me as we were fully self-sufficient. It also meant that war was going to be coming soon. I ended up walling off the main dock entrance where all of the enemy Vikings were getting onto my island from. This way, in case King Banta declared war and tried to attack from that angle, it would also be walled off now. After starting construction on a new neighborhood where the old forest used to be, King Banta had sent over yet another diplomat, even though one had just left my island the previous year. I wonder what he could possibly want now. When I started talking to him, it looked like he was requesting materials to build a manor. This had to be some kind of trick because he was just telling me how we weren't friends. But I figured that I would play along with it, so I started preparing the gift for him. While I was busy ruling my kingdom, I didn't realize it, But Greater Vortia was under attack. There was a Viking invasion going on, and my walls had been breached. I was pretty upset that I hadn't been informed about this until the very last second, when the enemies had made it inside of the walls. This prompted me to further wall off any more gaps that were left on my island. I don't know why I was taking so long to do this, but now was the time to finish it off. Let's get to work. In addition to the new walls, a large reservoir was built on the southernmost part of my island. I had also placed down some stockpiles all the way on the other end of my island near the peninsula. This way, when I built production buildings there, my people wouldn't have to run all the way across just to drop off some goods. It seemed like Greater Vortia had a lot more wood than Vortia. So I built a path into the forest and placed down another forester. It might not seem like it, but wood is probably one of the most important commodities that you could have for raising a kingdom. I then ended up putting down a road and placing 2 more manors off of it. It seemed like I didn't have enough space to place a road fully going around the manors, so I ended up destroying some of the trees and walls that were blocking where a road would be. Good thing my giant dock project was almost finished on this side of the island. I could now free up a lot of space that was earlier being consumed by the walls. King Banta had then sent over a diplomat to ask me if I could send him some materials to build a manor. I was already sending him one gift, and I decided that was enough, so I told him no. My diplomat had then arrived at his island with the gift, and when I brought it there, it seemed like he had no recollection that I told him I would bring it. He made it seem like this was just a random gift, which it wasn't. We discussed this earlier. Then, in an effort to get more wood, I placed down a road with 2 more foresters at the end of it. Oh no, a dragon's attacking King Banta's lands. I feel so bad. King Banta wasn't able to protect his citizens from the giant red dragon plaguing his town. It was even able to fly all the way across his island and towards the beginning of mine, where I finished it off and killed it. Somebody's got to build more ballistas. Speaking of ballistas, I ended up building a really large one on the coast of my island bordering with King Banta's island. That way he could see troops over his walls and even shoot at them if need be. I even realized that I could build the ballista even closer to King Banta's island on the dock that was soon to be. So I started construction on that portion of the dock a little bit early. Upgrading this ballista and moving it over a bit gave me inspiration to go upgrade the rest of the ballista towers in my kingdom. It now made sense to expand my dock a little bit more since I was collecting a decent amount of wood. And when I say a little bit, I really mean a lot. I started working on the large tower that faced King Banta's island. That was when I realized 2 giant ogres had made it into my castle. Wow, they didn't even stand a chance. I really needed to finish my dock soon, as my walls were too thin and Vikings were able to break through them with ease. So I started working more on my dock and even fortifying the wall a little bit, but it was only going to be temporary because the wall needed to expand outward. King Banta had then sent over a diplomat asking for some help with the next Viking invasion. I figured I would tell him yes just to make him happy, as the relationship was getting really low. Greater Vortia honestly needed more defenses. So, near the keep walls, I placed down 2 more towers with ballistas on them. I guess it's technically the outpost walls, as there's only an outpost in the middle, but you guys get my point. Not too long after that, I came across one of the oldest citizens in my kingdom. Their name was Mary, and they were 99 years old. Now that's what I call a long life. To be honest, I really shouldn't be talking though. I had been alive for over 560 years at this point. Well, there goes all my wood. I had realized that a lot of my buildings I was placing were all for functionality. It was time I start working on a little bit of aesthetics. So I placed down a well and surrounded it by gardens. This should surely be enough, right? After I got my first look at the garden, I then headed over to the side of the castle near the peninsula. I started building some more manors as I wanted to make this residential area a lot nicer. I had also thrown down some more functional buildings to keep the people happy who lived nearby. I didn't really anticipate too many people walking on the roads near these houses, so I replaced one of them with a garden path just to make things a little bit more aesthetic. The time had come. I was now able to wall off the docks on Vortia. This was going to be a game changer, as the enemy Vikings wouldn't have a single spot to land. They would only be able to land where I'd want them to. So, I could in a sense set up a death trap that they think is the only way that they could get onto my island, and boom, a Viking death trap. There was still a little bit more dock that needed to be built, but it wouldn't take that much longer, as we had the resources and had the manpower to get it up quickly. As expected, 2 dragons started to fly over Greater Vortia. This time, they didn't last more than 5 seconds each. All of the ballistas were able to do enough damage to take them out in that little amount of time. Honestly, it had really been a century of building. I was making improvements for both castles every second that I got. It wasn't as exciting as if there was a war going on, but building and improving things is always fun too. I had honestly forgotten about the witch. That was when I headed over and started to redeem my very first potion from her. I got double the tree yield, so my foresters would collect even more wood now. I don't know why I didn't think about this earlier, but this was actually really useful. After speaking with the witch, I placed down a cathedral, as everybody wasn't happy that I just bought a potion from a witch. Buying the potion had also caused me bad luck. A whole bunch of Vikings came to invade, and this time they came full force. A couple of giant ogres had made it to one of my gates on Greater Vortia. They ended up destroying it, but luckily we took them out in time. Back on Vortia, a huge collection of Vikings had broken down one of the walls, and they made it inside of my castle for the most part. This was very unfortunate because there was 5 or 6 different Viking units who made it inside of the walls. My citizens were freaking out as there were Vikings not too far away from them. Luckily, they didn't make it into the second layer of walling though. So most of the people were safe, and all of the Vikings had got taken out before they got to any houses. After the raid, I started finishing off the dock on Vortia and the little housing area near the peninsula on Greater Vortia. Why is King Banta building up all those troops? I hadn't even considered it yet, but King Banta had betrayed me once. What are the odds that he would do it again? It seemed pretty likely as he was building up a large army. He could just be building them up to handle the Vikings, but at the same time, wouldn't you just build up your defenses then? Unsurprisingly enough, I had fended off another dragon invasion. I had then built a large reservoir, and it even helped King Banta deal with some Vikings. This was only to get on his good side, as his army was starting to look bigger and bigger. It was starting to look like King Banta wasn't the one who needed help fighting off the Vikings. Greater Vortia had been invaded, and 2 of the walls had been breached. This was really unacceptable. So, I started placing down some more archer towers at the main gates that the enemies come from. I even planned on expanding the walls to be even bigger. Speaking of walls, I started building even more of them on the dock in the land of Vortia. I was placing so many walls, it started to look like a huge cluster. I could have built these in a more organized manner, but it's whatever. Surprisingly enough, King Banta had sent over a diplomat to tell me how appreciative he was for the help in the last invasion. It was pretty weird because our relationship had shot up very high just because of that one event. I then checked in with the witch, and it seemed like she no longer requested any payments. This meant that I could now buy any spell from her at any given time as long as there's no cooldown. I no longer had to pay just to see the spells. I really liked the dock idea that I was doing on Vortia, so I started to replicate it a bit on Greater Vortia by starting construction on some docks. The only thing is I had a whole bunch of fisher huts that would no longer be usable. Back on Vortia, I was now able to make the walls a little bit thinner. Any area that had more than 3 layers, I shortened down a bit. This ended up saving a decent amount of space that I could now build new buildings on. Uh-oh, that's a lot of Vikings. A Viking invasion broke out, and all of the enemies had rushed one of my fishing huts. I didn't really think about this, but Vikings could still land on them, and they could easily start destroying my castle walls. So I'm gonna have to get rid of all my fishing huts maybe. We'll deal with that later, let's just take care of the Vikings. As the Vikings made their way closer to my inner wall, they immediately got shredded. I also commanded the rebuilding of the walls before any more enemies had made it onto the dock. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get them up before they made it. 3 different ogres were all marching towards my inner walls now. This wasn't going to be good. The ogres had made it to the first gate leading towards my keep. They had been taken out, but they did a decent amount of damage. That was when I noticed some more Vikings land in my main dock area and start attacking the walls. This inspired me to move my dock a little bit more out and start fortifying that area a little bit better as well. That Viking invasion really was a wake-up call for me. I started fortifying the walls even more as I didn't want them to be breached so easily. It was also time to start preparing my transport ships as I planned on training a whole bunch of troops and had a very good scheme that came to mind. What do you know, my relationship with King Banta just decreased. Oh, there it goes down again. It's starting to look like I might have to prepare for revenge, after all.